Hey, what's up, everybody? GP13 here, joined today with Henry, aka Big Buck Hunter on Twitter, aka head of trading at Novig. Or
Yeah, I'm the head of trading at Novig.
okay, I didn't know yeah, Novig is
Everybody wears a
a
few hats. So
yeah, I'm sure. Um, but yeah, I stumbled across you because you posted, or I think Jacob retweeted a thread of yours about market making, and I thought it was probably like one of the best concise breakdowns of sports betting market making available. So yeah, I just got to reading that. You had a great thread about building an auto mover, and I'm super excited to have you on because I think the exchanges are a super prevalent model right now in terms of like the discourse, at least, but a lot of people don't know a lot about them. So I think, we'll get to learn a lot from you today.
happy to be here, and thank you for the kind words.
Yeah. Do you want to just give everybody a quick breakdown of your background and how you got to Novig, and then we can kind of hop into the good stuff?
Sure. Yeah, I kind of speed ran a path that I think a lot of people, including yourself, take. I I always loved playing poker and was kind of fascinated by gambling and making easy money the hard way. So when COVID started and everybody got into baking artisanal bread, my little self improvement project was I bought Pile Solver.
Oh yeah. Wow.
I did some coaching,
Yep.
some
Who
video
coached you?
training. I don't want to say.
Okay. Okay.
Um,
Okay.
he there was a little bit of a falling out,
Okay.
but
Okay.
he was a good guy. But I just I don't know if he'd want me attaching my name to him for whatever reason. Uh, but yeah, so and just started running sims and generating aggregation reports, and there was obviously this like big boom of private games, app games at the exact same
Yep.
time. Um, and I got really into that, playing a lot of poker, and doing well. And as I'm sure you've experienced, when you're doing well playing bigger tables in a club game, people start messaging you and being like, "Hey, what's your Telegram? How do I get in touch with you?" That was where, by the way, I came up with the name Big Buck Hunter. The union I was in was based out
Yeah.
of like mid
Texas.
Atlantic, rural
Okay.
Maryland. No, it was like
Okay.
Maryland, and the biggest whales were all these like middle aged white guys. And I thought, okay, I need to try to blend in as
Yep.
best as possible.
Yep.
um, I don't know how effective that was. Yeah, so I started like talking to a lot of young guys, kind of either poker pros or guys who were making some extra money playing poker. And at the same time, I was like betting $50 a game on NFL sides for
Hmm.
the fun of it, and knowing I
Right.
wasn't winning. Um, and in the course of doing that, I somebody said, "Hey, I've got a bookie if you ever want to use a bookie," because I was using offshores. There wasn't retail betting in New York yet, and I didn't really think I needed one, but I thought it would be fun to have one, and so I got set up with my first ace skin. And I remember when he asked me, "What kind of limits do you want?" I didn't really understand the credit nature of the thing. I thought it was like a responsible gaming question, like what should I cap you from losing? And I was like, man, you don't have to worry about me. And
Yeah.
he's like, no, but
So
I have to put
nice.
a number in here. So, I had like $1,000 and I was spending $50 a game with him. And so then sports betting got legalized in New York. I reached out to him and I was like, hey, I'm going to grind through all these bonuses and do all this stuff. And I'm probably not going to use the site anymore, but I really appreciate you letting me use this for last year. And he said, sure thing. If you ever want to make some money, I also do some buy side stuff, and the accounts are useful. And I knew what he was talking about. I was not completely green to the whole thing,
Hmm.
but I didn't take him up at the time. And so I kind of churned through promos, and then was doing some low hanging fruit stale line, odd shopping, openers stuff, and talking to some of the other guys who I was playing poker with who were doing similar things and strategizing. And I got to the point my accounts are mostly limited. I've made some money, and I want the train to keep rolling. And I was like, I'm gonna call that guy up. So I called up my old bookie. And I told him everything I'd been doing, and I said, now what? The classic question. Okay, I annihilated all my accounts the stupidest possible way, and then it just went from there. So then I really had a mentor who was helping me figure out, how to get PPHs, how to be doing um, markets that might not get you killed as quickly, or to leverage relationships with other people, and all the kind of often grimy sort of in between stuff. Um, and I did that for certainly a full year, and just kept building the network. And you know how it is. All this stuff is exponential, right? Like once you know how to do
Mhm.
one or two things, you can share that information with somebody else who shares what they're doing with you, and you find these little spots. You just keep finding spots. It's all about finding spots.
Mhm.
Um, and it builds and builds and builds, and then it's dead, and you have to start over. Um, but I'm 35. I was married when I started doing this. My wife got pregnant pretty early on, and so I had a very clear view that I was not going to be in the streets banging guns. Like it just didn't make sense to be doing that, and I needed something a little more stable. I need health insurance. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Um, so at the same time, I was an engineer at Bloomberg. I was working on you know price monitoring, pricing screens and back end tools and stuff like that. Um, Kid was born, went on leave, and I thought, like between engineering and domain expertise, I really think I could do a lot for a sports book or for a market maker or a company in the space. Um, but I want to do everything. I don't want to just go be an engineer at DraftKings, and it's
Mhm.
like, okay, you work on the login page and it's got nothing to do with sports betting or whatever.
Yeah.
And I obviously don't want to just go be a trader. A trader is a perfectly fine job at some point in your career, but I was a little further along than that. But I also had no experience. And so what I ended up doing, which I think is a good thing to do if you have an unusual story and you're trying to break into a niche industry, is I looked up a bunch of market making, sportsbook, exchange startups, and I looked at the VC funds that had backed them, and I reached out to a bunch of venture capital funds, and I found contacts there and just explained, this is what I've been doing, this is what I've been thinking. I just want advice from somebody who's obviously been looking at the space. Like, what do you think
Mhm.
is growing? What what is interesting in your portfolio? Where would you send someone like me if I was just a friend and you were giving advice? Which is a good thing to do because those people have a lot of pull at the companies they back, and also if you tank the interview, you can still go apply to the company. Like
Right to
nobody
the
at the
job.
company
Yeah.
knows that you tanked the interview.
That's
Um,
it's a hedge, or you're
yeah,
naturally hedged.
you give yourself a mulligan.
Yeah.
And so I did that. I talked to a few companies that you would probably know, and I ended up talking to Jacob and Kalechi at Novig, coming in for an interview, saying, "Look, if you're going to start an exchange, um, market making on your own, at least to start, is going to be such an advantage, and I think I can really help you do it. And here's all the reasons." And they agreed, and so I joined in June, just like 10 months ago. We basically had little to no market making software, and we built the whole thing over 6 months, and now it's what runs the app.
So cool. So cool. Um, so couple questions. One fun fact I was telling you before. I met Jacob and Kalechi and interviewed, I think in the same, it was like a build your own role. And um yeah, didn't get the job. And if that happened, who knows? Maybe you'd be interviewing me on the Big Buck
Very
Hunter
possible.
podcast. Um, but I met both of them. I really like them a lot. I think they're super smart. They're very young. Um, they went through what Y Combinator and and have some cool funds invested in the company, and I really thought they were taking a very uh, scientific, like thoughtful approach to this. Whereas, like you said, if you go to DraftKings, it's just like I don't think that you would have enjoyed your time there as much as you would enjoy your time here building, doing something different, doing something intellectually challenging. Um, and the fact that you've gotten this experience to build something in 10 months is crazy. I mean, like, that's uh, how hard was that? That must have just been insane.
It was hard. There was a fair amount of like literal whiteboarding math about, what happens when somebody does this and we're offering this market and then they do
Yep.
this. Yeah, the auto mover thing, I tried to explain it succinctly in that thread, but part of the reason an auto mover seems simple is because there's so much stuff you would never do as a bettor because you expect the auto mover to handle it gracefully. But if it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't handle it gracefully, you're gonna kill it. So
Right.
like that guy abnormally distributed had a good thread a while
Yep.
ago about a season where the Knicks were playing their starters all 12 minutes in the first quarter,
Mm-hmm.
and the first quarter spreads just looked like derivatives of the full game spreads.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but they shouldn't have been. The team was overpowered relative to their
Mm-hmm.
absolute strength in the first quarter, and so you could bet Knicks first quarter, and then maybe the full game spread would move too much, and then you could bet
Yep.
the full game spread.
Yep.
And if you don't have a system that understands that yes, there is positive correlation between the first quarter spread and the full game spread, but it's not complete. And the more pressure we have on both of those poles, the more we just have to naturally disentangle them. You're going to get clicked back and forth forever. Um,
Yep.
and there are markets on major books where this happens, right? Like the way same game parlay calculators work, they have assumptions about correlations between legs built into them that traders cannot manipulate.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I remember there was a game where Josh Giddey's over assists on Caesars correlation was backwards. So usually, if you put over assists and Gilgeous-Alexander over points, the payout's no good. It's like
Sure.
plus 220 because they go together. But he was getting the boost when you put them together. You were getting like plus
Mm-hmm.
380, like somewhere the value was flipped. Um, and I kept clicking the parlay, and all they could do was just move the underlying line, and then
Yeah.
his assist line would get so high, I just bet it straight
Had
back.
that. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and after a half hour, they just pull the Giddy line because there literally is no mechanism
Right.
to fix that.
Right.
Um, I mean, and that was a glaring example. But there's me and a friend have done some work like looking at the way correlation is constructed, and it's certainly not just we've simulated these games at the play
Mm.
by play level and in the full distribution. Here's how many times all of your legs hit. That's not what's happening,
Is
which
it
is the dream way to market make. So
it's a
yeah,
matrix, basically?
yeah. So I mean we just do full game spreads, totals, and money
Yeah.
lines. We simulate every game um, many times very quickly, and we redo that live. And from
Mm-hmm.
any point in the game, we can sim out the rest of the game. And yeah, so we end up with those matrices that you've seen that are like these are the actual like when we simulated this game, this is literally what happened in the 30,000 times or whatever that we simulated it. So it's very clear. This is the number of times it went over. This is the number of times it went under, and the correlation is right there in front of you. And what's useful, right? You can get into a game. So maybe you've got, the Chiefs are down 24-10 and you have a lot of exposure to Chiefs plus 3.5. Your system now understands that exposure to Chiefs plus 3.5 is equivalent to exposure to over 40 or some strike because there's no way for them to cover that
Mm-hmm.
without scoring at least two more touchdowns. And so you now want to coalesce those things. or similarly, like if you had huge exposure to a total number and you were fading off of it, and the game has gone so far the other way that strike is just never going to happen, you should stop fading your prices. That's no longer
Hmm.
a risk because it's just not
Hmm.
within the realm of possibilities. And so, yeah, figuring out all that and really just doing it for sides and totals was enough of a challenge. We wanted part of the reason we do that is because we want to really do things right. You know, we don't want to not limit anybody. We want like infinite rebet, fast rebet. You can rebet after a second with us. It's really just the speed of us reloading the orders. So we only trade things, not necessarily that we think like we've originated the greatest lines on earth, right? Like we don't care about openers that much. We care about the limit schedule, the sensitivity to volume, um, and just moving and moving fast.
Yeah, it's like I forget who said it, but I think it was. I'm just gonna assume it was Spanky. It was probably someone else, but it was like it doesn't matter, you know. It doesn't actually. It might have been Matt Metcalf if I'm really thinking about it, but it was something about like doesn't really matter how good your openers are. It's just how fast you get to the close or how fast you get to the most efficient line um,
Yeah,
from a
I mean you
bookmaker's
can
perspective.
hypothesize opening every NFL game as a pick'em with
Right.
$1 limits and
Yep.
4% hold. It costs you $7 to realize the team is minus 400. You know, you would never do that, but like it's really all about that schedule more than anything
Yeah.
else. Yeah,
Well, let's walk through it because your market making thread, I think, basically goes over the schedule and kind of the more important nuances than openers. The thread started, I liked the thread. It starts as a market maker, you charge VIG for two reasons: one, to make money, two, to not lose money. Do you want to just expand on that? And then we'll get into the mechanics of it.
yeah, for sure. Um, so I'm certainly, you know, Jacob has a lot of experience betting on sports. We've got a lot of guys with finance backgrounds here, a couple former Jane Street people. I would say I'm probably currently the deepest person in sports betting when I got here. And so when I showed up, I was lobbying for all these things just because it's what everyone does. You know,
Mm-hmm.
we need to open with low limits, and then they go up at this time, and then blah. People say, "Well, what? I believe you, but explain it, like, and justify it." And we didn't do anything that we couldn't sell the whole team on. This is why you have to do it, and and it's a helpful process because the more you do that, the more to explain something, you have to formalize it, right? You have to actually come up with a logical framework. And so we had started with just a bunch of labels, like in programming enums, right? Like, well, this is this category, and I'm just penciling in numbers
Mm-hmm.
because that's what I think the numbers should be. And the more we abstracted it, it's like, well, you can actually come up with some parameter explaining specifically why this category of bet is a challenge or this one is not, and what would make that change. So yeah, to get to the question, your your theoretical hold, right, which is if you sum up the probability of all of the specific outcomes in a market, what is the total price above 100%? Um, that is kind of in a great perfect scenario where you have balanced action or long term action on these kinds of markets, and your numbers are very efficient. That's what percentage of the money that gets wagered on your platform you're going to keep. Right? That's what theoretical hold is.
Sure.
You besides some weird things like, you know, screwing people on long shot bias or whatever, you generally would never expect to hold more than your theoretical hold over a long period of time. It's a
Mm-hmm.
bit of a ceiling. Uh, you certainly would expect to hold less because of adverse selection and because you're make side, right? You're putting up targets for people to pick off. Um, and so what we tried to think about was what are all the things that make it hard to trade a market? How much harder does that one specific thing make a market? How much more difficult does it become to trade on behalf of that thing? Um, and then how much additional theoretical hold would you want to add to mitigate those effects versus your entire slew of customers, right? So pure winners, there's no amount of hold you can get to beat them, because at some point you get wide enough that they're going to stop betting, right? But you assume you have some recreational flow. You look at data and see what is it proportional to more informed flow, and you say, okay, generally this is how much I have to apply for this specific reason to protect myself, and then all the additional hold after that is where you make the money, because that's, okay, once we protected ourselves, this is where we make
Mm-hmm.
money. Um, Now this is a really complicated problem, and there's no true formal solution for it, right? Because with each additional quantity or dollar quantity you provide, the flow does get more adversarial, right? Like for instance, we kind of just come up with an internal Kelly, and then we have like a virtual bankroll,
Mm-hmm.
and we just make orders at whatever like Kelly is on that bankroll. Um, But if we were to 10x in size, we'd have to change all those underlying parameters, because the toxicity on $20,000 limits is a lot higher than the toxicity on $2,000 limits, right? So these are abstractions. Um, but the general concept, to get more specific, is things like, in general, 1 minute before post, that there's no toxicity to your flow. Certainly on our platform, right? If you're beating a major market at post, you're not clicking it with us. You're going somewhere you can get six figures down. And so when we open a line, maybe 24 hours before an event or a week before for NFL, it's much more challenging. And so we set a number somewhere around 4.5%. Like, we need to have at least 4.5% hold to not get killed on opening
Mm-hmm.
lines. And then linearly that decreases as we get to post. And a
So,
trader can override any of these things. They can,
mm-hmm.
like the Super Bowl on Tuesday before the Super Bowl, there's no injuries. Nothing's going to happen. Like, get rid of all of that so-called time-based adversariality. But in
Yeah.
general, like, the system is there.
I had a question about the linear, because it seems to me it's like slightly, there's certain times that are more valuable or more important than others, right? Like, or if I'm just thinking because it's basketball season, right? Like lineups,
Yeah.
whenever they announce, like, is that the bane of the linear, linear model's existence?
Yeah, totally. And we're working on something for actually consuming lineup information, finalized lineups, and then like player level of an injury report, which of these would actually affect a number and which would not. Um, if and when we have that built, that would we would reduce the amount of time-based adversariality a lot on any market where we're doing that, right? We would say we don't want to double count anything. Like, okay, that
Mm-hmm.
is now already encompassed
Mm-hmm.
by this other mechanism that has player level information.
It's like
Um, but
event
anything
based.
yeah, yeah. Uh, but we don't have that yet. so
Yeah,
so
no,
it's
that
it's
sounds
mostly
really. I
approximated
mean,
time.
that sounds super hard. Like, I bet also like that's the thing I find on any side of the counter. I mean, not I haven't been on your side, but like a lot of times I think people think that these things have to be these like perfect machines, and
Yeah,
like sometimes you got to go out there with what you got and adjust in your mind. Like that the NBA releases lineups. It's not like it's unknown to you or a trader, and like if it's
and
hard
we
for a
have people
computer,
trading. Yeah, yeah.
right? How is that set up? Like how what is a trader doing at Novig? Like I know you're kind of seemingly overseeing like most of the tech plus trading, but like what is a dedicated trader doing?
So nobody is a full time dedicated trader.
Mm-hmm.
We have a couple of part time traders, mostly to make sure that lines are opening correctly in the morning and restoring liquidity if we get cleared on something overnight. And then we have maybe four engineers who have licenses to trade in the state of Colorado,
Mm-hmm.
and so who are allowed to. But more than 50% of it is me on my phone. The
Yeah, yeah,
software runs on
yeah.
mobile, and I get an alert, and if there's anything to do, I just pop the software open and I adjust whatever needs to be adjusted. Um, yeah, but that's because the software is automated, right? Like you
Yeah.
said, we've definitely screwed things up where nobody's paying attention, and like LeBron is questionable or something, and
Yeah.
you get ripped, but you get ripped one time.
Right.
Um, and we our the quantity we provide decays exponentially, right? So if you have a 2K limit on a side and you
Hmm.
hit it, we restore a second later with 1K, then a second later with
Yeah.
500. It very quickly is not worth your time.
Yep.
That way we always have liquidity available for recreational players, and then a trader has to come in and say what's going on here. Okay, adjust numbers, restore liquidity, and then it pops right back up to being a 2K limit or whatever it is.
That's the thing with the financial markets. Like when I was an equity trader, you knew like you didn't know because there's like spoofing and whatnot, but like you knew kind of the liquidity ladder. And in sports books, it's like this is this, and we're not going to show you anything behind it. You also don't know how much you can bet, and like if you hit it, you also can't hit it again. And it's just like there's a mechanism for this that like works really well and is like
Yeah,
in financial institutions has been going on for years. Like that always confused me as to why there wasn't a ladder. You can, yeah, like you said, the offer can be 2000 and then like offer plus one or whatever you're doing could be like 1005. Like that's a good way to work.
yeah.
Why do you think that
There's
draft,
a
I
lot of
mean,
things.
anyone doesn't
Yeah,
do
there's a
that?
lot of things we'd like to do, but well, look, I I'm kind of I'm kind of a defender of the recreational books. Like when I played poker and when I bet
Yep.
on sports, there's a saying that the money is the scoreboard, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, kudos to you if you're playing the biggest crushers in the world and holding your own, but the guy who's taking home cash is the one who's winning. That's the point of this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And in the current ecosystem, uh, things are set up so the most profitable way to do this is the way that the big recreational books do it. And I think, yeah, another thing I've learned is I feel like just about everybody in sports betting has insufficient respect for their opponents. And your opponent is everyone. It's the other bettors, it's the other sports books, it's anyone who's moving faster than you or who has less mouths to feed or whatever. Um, and kind of, everybody's an idiot, everybody's waiting to take advantage of. Um, I I think if you think about trading, right? There's a whole pipeline of risk mitigation. It's how hard are we going to work on these openers? Uh,
Mm-hmm.
how much money are we going to take? How often are we going to lock? Are we going to lock a market because the star is questionable? We don't have reports yet. Um, what are we going to do about these models that are powering same game parlays on player props? Like, are we worried about getting killed on them? What about live? How much uptime are we going to have live? Uptime is huge live. We cannot quote as much live uptime as FanDuel or DraftKings can because we have instant confirm. We don't even have like a 5-second delay.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's a product problem. And a winning sports bettor can win at every one of those choke points, right? Like there's
Mm-hmm.
nobody who only has an edge in one of those things, right? Like if
Mm-hmm.
you get it, you can find the weak points in all of those things. And so from a book's perspective, do I want to invest in all of that? And by the way, there's no form of investment that doesn't create friction for the user, right? The only way to like really stop someone at each of those checkpoints is to create some kind of friction, some kind of review or reduce limits or off time. Or do I just want to not let anybody into the ecosystem who can do that or let them in at reduced limits? And yeah, I don't blame them for doing it the way they're doing it. And I think the more novel thing I would say is I'm less skeptical of their ability to actually do things the right way if they wanted to. I
Mm-hmm.
think they're capable of running so vulnerably because they've made the flow so recreational.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of really smart people working at these companies with
Mm-hmm.
multi-billion-dollar valuations. And if they had to change things, I think they would. So I don't know. That's just kind of a pro rec book rant. But
I'm
yeah, I
in.
forget how we even got
I
there.
think I agree with that. Like, uh, I mean, what's the most important thing in gambling is game selection. Like, I've been in gambling for 15 years. I don't think that's ever changed in my mind. So, DraftKings has the best game selection. Their marketing team is essentially their game selecting team, and
Yeah.
they pour a lot of money into it. So it's like I can't argue with that either. I think it's a great point. No matter
Even
how
when
much
they
we
were
kick
like,
our feet.
yeah, they were giving money hand over fist away with like these $3,000 deposit matches. It was like, how could you be
Mm-hmm.
so stupid? But the stock price was skyrocketing at the same time. So it's like,
Mm-hmm.
is DraftKings the bag holder here, or like
The
are the
shareholders.
shareholder? You know, like who are you
Yeah.
really killing? Like, not
Right.
that it matters, but just worth paying attention to.
I think it's all very interesting. I love to look into the business side of these places because I think there's a lot of tells onto like what they're looking for, what they aren't looking for, and like there's areas as a better that you can exploit or just like be better at if you understand and put yourself in the shoes of the sports book and in the shoes of the business, not just like the headlines maker. So I always love hearing people's like smart people's takes on companies like that or just like any business. But I want to go to the market making again because what you guys do and you've talked about this a little bit was the essentially the score distribution matrix, right?
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
this was in your Twitter thread. I'll link this when I post the episode so people can kind of get a visual of this. But you you have a matrix that shows your essentially how much exposure, how much you could lose or win on a certain score in a game. So it's like the way you wrote it, you said our research team models each game we trade to produce a distribution of possible final scores. From there, rather than worry about your exposure to specific markets like Kansas City money line or over 47.5, you can calculate the exposure to specific outcomes. Example, Kansas City 31, San Francisco 24. And you touched a little bit about why you do that. I'm curious to know what because you hinted at like there probably are some downsides, but you think it's the best way to do. What do you think are the downsides of that method?
Yeah. So first of all, it doesn't scale to an enormous number of markets
Hmm.
um, yet at anywhere I know. So, like I was saying, if we wanted to trade player props and SGPs and first team to score and everything like that, your simulation to continue doing it in this manner, which is a really good manner, um, your simulation would need to be at the player level, play level, like, okay, first and 10 was a 3 yard carry by Alexander Madison. Second and 7 was an incompletion over the middle to Justin Jefferson. Um, in order to actually map Justin Jefferson's receiving total to a total and
Hmm.
determine what the correlation is between those things and do all that beautiful, matrix math. Um, that's super difficult to achieve. It's incredibly computationally expensive. Like even what we're
Hmm.
doing right now, we had to do some tricky stuff. Like we pre-cache these solutions to individual bands of scores.
It's like PO
It's not.
solver when you save your
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So it's like theoretically possible, but you start running into both the limits of what is your team actually going to do? Are they going to do it very accurately? And what can you even compute in a meaningful amount of time? And so sooner or later you have to become kind of disentangled, right? Like you probably just need to model Justin Jefferson's receiving yards on its own or as part of a pool of total receiving yards that are available to the Vikings. And so I think you can still. I'm kind of making stuff up here right now. By the
No,
way,
it's
I
yeah,
would always.
it'll get past. I'm not
Yeah,
a football for me. Like I'm like,
yeah.
yeah, that makes sense.
So I think you certainly could get to like, okay, we have some distribution of possible passing yards and who they would land with, and the more volume we take on Justin Jefferson over we are going to also tick up Kirk Cousins or whoever they have this year. His over. We're going to start bringing the other receivers down under because like there has to be something there. You know, in an ideal world, you're trading so tight and your users are so efficient that they're clicking Jefferson over and Osborne under it, like everything, but you don't really get that. You know
Yep.
what I mean? You have to
Yep.
infer like there's a style to it. So the more you can like actually model the relationships with those things, the more accurate your bookmaking is going to be. But it doesn't scale to like, right. You couldn't do that and put together like, okay, I simulated every single play in the 2024 NFL season. And now I have good Super Bowl futures, right? Like that's
Right.
ridiculous.
Right.
It's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
So that's one of the limits for sure.
No, that the thing you said about your users like who would click Cousins and Jefferson together and would also click like the game total was what you said about alts in your thread too. It was like ideally your users would just click the whole ladder, like main price, alt one, alt two, alt three. And then you would know, okay, we adjust all of them. But it seems like in practice, most of the time a user, even a sharp user, is just clicking like the main line and you have to adjust the alts and you add a little extra juice to the alts because they're either sharper betters are playing them or there's just higher variance as a bookmaker when you're making them. Like what, talk us through the alt process a little.
Yeah, I mean, being an alt gets you an adversariality score. I mean, we just
Yeah.
had, and so what that means is the hold percentage is higher on those alt markets, but our calculated EV is lower, right? Because we
Mm-hmm.
separate. We don't just use hold for EV. We say, well, this is all like because it's odds jam users, and then this is where the actual profit is. So this is the EV. So even our trading software, yeah, you'll see like we have an EV column. I usually hide it, but it's a lot lower for the alts just because it's like these almost entirely get clicked by people who have found something on OddsJam,
Mm-hmm.
or there's an arbitrage and they'd rather than middle, they'd like a pure arbitrage, you know,
Mm-hmm.
which maybe we're still the right side of it, but that's always a bad sign
Yeah.
relative to, you know, just being in line with market. Um, yeah, so that's how we deal with it. There's a score for it, and it just naturally produces lower quantities.
Interesting. Okay. So it's just, it's really less of, well, I guess chicken or the egg, but it's people who are clicking it in are on average better than the average user in general.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah,
And
totally.
then that kind of transitions, and I think I saw this on the Novig Twitter account, but it was like 43% of users are profitable. This might have been from a bit ago, so I don't know the exact number now, but to me that like blew my mind. What's going on? you know.
Well, look, we haven't been open that long. We did more
Ah,
volume in March than we had done in the first 2 months. Um, so I that number will go down. But we definitely have winners, and we let the winners keep betting, and that's the way it works. And so our percentage of winners will always be higher, I believe, than most other shops,
got it.
and especially
That's,
with no commission. Yeah.
no, that's great. I mean, I think that was a pretty eye-catching ad, and I think it's interesting to see where that number goes. Like, yeah, obviously 43% is like extreme, but my opinion is, it could be higher than that 3% that was quoted on the it was Novig 43, other sportsbook 3, somewhere in between. Um, are you seeing people post liquidity like just bet?
So yeah, I should have said this sooner. We we targeted Colorado as a launch state, and we were in conversations with the Department of Gaming there, and we were under the impression that exchange wagering would be legal by the time we were live, and it just hasn't happened yet.
Mm,
Our expectation is that in the next few weeks, maybe even, they're going to
mm,
say the rules are finalized. Go ahead. Um, Obviously, all the tech's built. We've done beta tests with over
mm,
1,000 users market making. We saw a ton of posting then, but it was like a contest structure, so there was incentive
yeah.
to play for everything. So we'll probably see less than we did there at first. Um, but yeah, So right now we're basically just a low vig sportsbook is how it
Got it.
works with a ton of exchange features that just haven't been turned on. My guess would be I think we'll see a little bit more recreational market making than you see on any of the other exchanges
Hmm.
because of the no commission thing. I think
Right.
like there's just a fact that on a spread you can post even money and know someone else will get even money, and it's a pure honest to god no vig bet, just like you would make with a friend on Discord or something. And I
Right.
think that will help. um, I have a notebook full of ideas for how to create UI tools for recreational players to get into market making. And again, that's a regulatory challenge, right? Because it's like, how good can you make your app before, in the eyes of the law, you've turned your recreational user into a bookmaker, you know? And I even think asking some of those questions might have been what maybe delayed the process for us of getting these regulations in place. Um, but our first goal was let's build this thing. Let's get it out in the state. Let's prove we can do it. Let's do the trading ourselves and say this is for real. Uh, and then let's figure out the next big leap. And so we're having a lot of conversations around here about the next suite of things that we're going to do that are really going to be differentiated. And I think we're going to do some exciting stuff in the next few months, is what I'll say.
Okay. Okay. So, I mean, I assume that means bringing in some like more full time market makers who are outside of, because you guys have built out such a solid. You're like a market making firm right now, almost. Like, so would you want? Is it like is it better to have just you and individuals, or you and like financial institutions who like send in trading teams?
Well, there's multiple goals, right? Like Sport Trade, for instance, is obviously making this big splash with these enormous quantities on golf and everything. And
Shout out Sport Trade for golf. Thank you.
shout out Sport Trade, dude. Sport Trade killing it, Sig killing it, DL trading. Um, I I look at what Susquehanna is doing on Sport Trade, and it does not look like they are interested in making money at this time. It looks like a field of dreams. Build it, and they will come. uh, which makes sense for Sport Trade's valuation and kind of the maturity of their business, right? Is like they really would want to see highly liquid, big ticket sports betting, like a stock market kind of thing, happen. Um, for us, being newer and scrappier, there are other goals that would be a success for us without
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 saying
getting
exactly
too
what they are.
specific.
Okay.
Yeah. But so and then to get a little bit more behind the scenes here, part of that decision making, we talked about like DraftKings shareholders. We we did a raise to build this, and now you want to go out on the street, raise more money, hire more people, and scale, right? And so a lot of it is dependent on what do VCs want or think is going to work. And so, you'll talk to a lot of VCs who say, I don't want to invest in you if there's all this risk because you're also trading. Like if you de-risked it and you brought in a third party market maker, then I know you're just a platform. There's no way you can go broke like certain new entrants have recently. Um,
Is that
and,
bang
and
bang at
that's
friends at units?
no comment. Um, and so you're looking, okay, maybe we have to do this to raise money, but also like we don't want to do this. And then somewhere else says you should make this a B2B business. Like you're already doing the trading, you can back all these things. And then what are the legal challenges of that? Like if you've got a bunch of offshores that would pay you for your pricing, you know, what do you do with that decision? And so um, we like being deep in the messy, hard stuff. And
Mhm.
I think that's where we're going to stay. And we're going to decide how best to use our time and energy. But the main thing is we want to get our liquidity, our numbers out to as many people as possible. We want as many human beings as possible firing into us, getting fair prices, being able to make their own orders, not getting limited. Um, and and I really, my like dream customer is a guy like me, like a dad who wants to bet $500 on a football game because he can watch it. And he doesn't maybe do it now because he knows he's going to get screwed on price. But if there was some notion of like, oh, no, you do it on this app and it's actually fine. Like, this is
Yeah.
not all that irresponsible. That you just get a bunch of sort of mid level people say, oh, like I bet on sports, but I'm not dumb. I use Novig. I don't really lose any money, and they've got some things that make sure I don't get screwed, and that's what the product is. Um, and yeah, so that's my ideal clientele more than anybody.
I like that. I put out, I don't know if you saw this, but I tweeted yesterday. I was like, I don't know, the sports betting marketing has gotten to me a little, like it gets to everyone, but I was like, shouldn't there just be a book that's like, hey, look, we want to win your money. That's the only way that we get paid. But like, you know, we'll give you a fair game. I hope you lose, but I hope you don't lose that much. Something like
Yeah,
that. It's like um at the end of the day, like you still, if you're, it's just like if you're, I just feel like there's this like this just fake gloss over a lot of these companies that like the engine that is running them somehow isn't literally the user's losses, which,
yeah.
I don't know. I
Well, I think a negative thing that has happened in the industry is, first of all, the way taxes and a lot of things are set up, the books really need to hold a lot.
mhm,
It's important to them that the hold percentage be high, rather in addition to revenue being high. Like, all
mhm,
things being equal, they would like the hold percentage to be higher. The the class of people I just talked about, people with disposable income who would like to bet on sports but understand that it is not responsible to casually bet on sports, or that it is a losing proposition. It can be done
mhm.
responsibly, but it's a losing
Right, right, right,
proposition.
right, right.
And a huge percentage of them, especially in America, coming out of, we have a culture of fantasy sports and everything, have settled on, I'm going to make very small bets to make sure that I'm quote unquote responsible. And then in order to make the small bet fun, it's a plus 2,000 parlay, right?
Mhm.
Like, that's where I get my kicks from. And, betting $50 on a parlay that's holding 30% is similar to betting a dime on a low vig sports book on a side. Now the
Right,
variance is a lot higher, but it does feel like you could you could get a bit of a cultural attitude change around that, to say like, hey, actually, this thing that people are kind of doing to avoid losing too much money is losing them a lot of money, and you can just bet on sports a way that actually makes you sweat and is really fun, and you're going to be fine. And here's how you
right,
can do it. Um,
right.
Now, I'm a gambler. That makes sense to me, and I love that. Uh, a lot of people don't see the world that way. I'm just one man, but that's what I would like to
The
see happen.
I had a I had a friend that I would just like give like literally just be like, he would be like, "What are you betting on in golf?" And I knew he liked to bet a little bit, so I would be like, "Oh, whatever." He liked to bet outright, so he's like, "Okay, I'll put $100 on Cam Young to win plus 2,500." And then he asked me like, he already has that bet on, and he's like, "What do you?" Oh,
Sorry, there's a
big order.
there's an earthquake in New York.
Oh
That
shit.
doesn't seem right, but apologies.
Oh, I thought Spanky just wiped the offer or something.
No, 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 no. We're a little too small fry for him.
But yeah, anyway, he is like, okay, he'll bet 100 on Cam Young outright, plus 2,500. And then he's like, what are you betting? I'm like, oh yeah, we have like, this matchup. It's at, minus 120. I was like, so just bet like 500 on it. He's like, what? That's way too much. I'm like, you realize your Cam Young outright is like,
Yeah,
if you actually like look at the risk, it's like way, way bigger sizing, right? And it's
yeah,
just like
yeah.
doesn't compute. So I think that's something that I've seen too. And I don't know. I mean, it seems like the world before SGPs, everybody was fine betting. sides and totals and stuff. And but you're right, it was more gamblers. Like it was more gamblers back then, less everyday, people. Now I talk to people who have no gambling background, and they'll be like, yeah, I have something on this from DraftKings or something. And it's wild to me because back in the day, I would only hear about sports bets from my people I met playing poker. It's a totally different ecosystem.
Totally. And there's a ceiling on how efficient a lot of those markets can get, right? Like player prop markets will always be highly inefficient because of just how sensitive they are to, you know, injuries and very small details. Like I don't think there's a possible way you get to a world where it's like, yeah, we open player props on Thursday and 95% of them close within the bounds of the VIG that we open on Thursday, right? Like we've figured out player props and so we can trade them at huge quantities. And so, yeah, that all requires a lot of the existing status quo to go on, right? Like if you have that fundamental issue, then you can't get to a point where you're like, well, these just trade like other huge markets and they're super liquid and fair and big players can be involved in them transparently, you know.
Yeah, I agree. So it's like, I mean, do you have an SGP engine now or no?
We do not. So that's one thing we've talked about. We're working on doing individual player props ourselves, uh, and and how that works, and trading them kind of like I talked about, where it's like, well, we at least understand correlations between different lines on players, and then building out to okay, kind of like pools of stats within teams and within events, and the thing about sports books is or a market maker, your models don't have to be particularly accurate, like accurate enough that you would actually originate a bet on them. They just have to capture like the overall behavior of the market accurately so that you can open a line and when you start taking money, you understand what the money means and where a line should go and what to do with it. So like we don't have to dominate the player prop market with our simulations to get something out. It just has to be good enough where if you looked at it, you go, yeah, that is the bell curve of what it looks like. And then, how it would be different for like a Rashid Rice versus, a Kyle Juszczyk or something. So we're going to do player props on our own. Same game parlays with unlimited rebet and no limiting. I don't think would ever happen with us. And so that's another thing where there are third party providers for that.
Yep.
Um, it's it's less in the spirit of everything else we've done, but
Mm,
people want it. And so do you ride off the goodwill of like, hey guys, look, we're doing the big markets the right way, the best we
right.
can. There's an SGP calculator if you want to do it. Here it is, but it works basically like it does anywhere else. Um, and then what does that cost us to do, and what does the integration look like versus the other things we can be doing? We have 6 engineers, so
Right.
where do we want to go with this stuff?
No,
What
it's
we're
a
not going to
total.
do, I'll tell you this: I think a lot of exchanges get really fixated on everything has to trade two ways and has to be public. Um, I don't think that's important. We're happy to trade things over the counter. We're going to do parlays over the counter. So like
Mhm.
if our best price on this total is this and this total is this, you can click on both and we'll just quote you some quantity on it. And we're not going to like open some marketplace RFQ thing where somebody else can
Mhm.
take the no on some.
Yep.
It's just too complex. And I don't think it actually solves a user problem, right? The user
Yeah.
problem is I like your lines. I would like to parlay them together. It's like, okay, we can deliver that to you.
But then the market maker's like, no, like I actually have this higher this goal of being a pure market maker, and they're like, well, I just want to parlay these bets.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's fine. I mean, like it's like anything in life. It's a little bit of everything. I don't think there's anything wrong with like. I mean, honestly, the most convincing arguments I've heard about how sports books should limit or whatnot is like have some indication of like what markets are actually markets what markets you're actually taking size on, and what markets are like carnival games, at the casino.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
like
I
that's
think
fine.
that's what we're thinking too, right? It's like this is the liquid. I mean, it's like when you go on Robinhood, and you have some sense of if you buy a stock, it's probably fairly priced, and if you're trading short expiration options, it's like you're gonna get killed doing this, but you can do it.
Right.
Like just a
Right.
little bit of that knowledge would go a long way.
I think that's fair. I think that's fun too. Like I think oftentimes, myself included, like in our community, we get bogged down in like, oh my God, I can't believe, like, and I find myself doing that. I can't believe that DraftKings or whoever's doing XYZ, but like ultimately, like people want what people want. Of course, like gambling is, has like negative externalities to it, but like there's a way, like you wouldn't want to go to Vegas and just take all the slot machines out of the casino. Like to me, that's crazy. Like I know they're a bad deal, but it's like you go to Vegas for a specific reason. It's part of the fun. You're there. Like, do you need slot machines on your phone? Maybe not. But like there's
Yeah,
some middle ground where like people enjoy gambling, and like there's some, you know, like sometimes you just have to like give the people what you want. I don't know.
yeah,
Seems
yeah.
fair.
Everybody's afraid to mention that it's just really fun to gamble. People love gambling, right? Like it's okay to say that. Like there's this positive element to the whole thing that you can acknowledge.
Yeah, I like to gamble. I think like if I didn't like to gamble, I wouldn't be a professional gambler.
I'm
Like
just looking
it's
over. Yeah, yeah, right. That's how you get into it, right? Is you're like, I really love doing this. Yeah, so I just thinking about any other things that are kind of novel about what we do. One thing is we wrote a bunch of code for player profiling. Okay,
mhm,
we're gonna calculate CLV for people who are betting pregame, or if they're more live, we're gonna more focus on results or kind of short-term line movement,
mhm,
and run these jobs and score everybody, and then you can kind of back out, right? Like, okay, if somebody's average pregame CLV is 3%, anytime they bet, if we consider them like a one source of truth to be blended with many sources of truth, they're saying the real line is this: it's 3% on every
mhm.
bet. We did all that. It's sitting in a branch on GitHub somewhere, and then we launched, and we just don't need any of it. Um,
Interesting.
at some point, we will, uh, but we with our current user base, which is a couple thousand people, we can tell everything we need to know about a bet more or less from the details of the bet, right? If somebody, and this is an extreme example, but if somebody max bets a total on an NCAA extra 15 minutes before limits go up, I don't need to see who did it. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
that's the reality. Um, and the other part of that is, we have very little money. We just raised what we needed to do this, so we really prefer to be delta neutral. Even if we do take a big bet of recreational money, we kind of want to fade our prices pretty significantly. Um, and I guess what that gets me to is one thing that I think people talk about that it's a distinction without a difference, but it's still worth saying is people always say books move off of sharp action, and it's more accurate to say they systematically ignore square action.
Mm.
Because first of all, you only ever move off of big bets, but bets that are a meaningful percentage of your total available quantity, whether it's a transparent quantity or not, right? Because you don't want to be like, oh, this guy's sharp, so when he bets $25, I move the line 10 cents, because you just spoof lines wherever they want,
Right,
you know.
right.
So you're already sub-selecting for this person is betting some percentage that matters of the total. And by the way, we do under the hood move off every bet of any size. If you bet $20 with us, at some decimal point, every single line on that market has changed. Now it doesn't show up on the app because it's
Right,
pretty
right,
far
right.
down, but it's factored in.
Everybody's a market mover. You could go to Novig and bet, and you can say you move markets.
If you want to experience the thrill of somebody moving off your action, you can do it with us. Um, so, and then if you just think about kind of like most traditional market making theory when dealing with people trading at quantity assumes highly informed counterparties and or anonymous counterparties, right? Like there's no notion of somebody who is trading sovereign bonds who's just button clicking for fun, right? So like
Hmm.
nobody who's ever thought about how to trade bonds. Like, well, what do we do about the recreational guy who's buying Singapore 10 years $1 billion at a time? It doesn't exist. Um, so so most of your thinking is we do kind of a like a Hanson's market maker, just sort of you have a sensitivity coefficient that you've kind of made up or that is based on your max available quantity, and just however much pressure you take in one direction, you fade prices that way. Um, and the only thing to then do is to say, oh, but if it was a recreational bet, we don't want to fade the prices because we feel like our line was already. It
Hmm.
doesn't actually tell us anything about the optimality of the line. Um, which how is that different from saying we only move off sharp action? It isn't really, but I think it does give a little bit more context rather than be like, oh, the books move off sharp action. It's like, no, they just move and they ignore you because you're dumb. Like that's maybe a little more descriptive of what's going on. um, and in fact, like the kind of the best way to implement this, in my opinion, and I know some other shops do it this way, and this is how we were doing it, is you still do all of the matrix math and the exposure calculations and stuff, and you just for your recreational customers scale their quantities down to like
Hmm.
25% or 10% of what they bet
Hmm.
before they are input into that, right? So if somebody bets
Hmm.
10,000 on a line, you treat it as though it's $1,000 line
Hmm.
bet. So it still applies some pressure in a direction, but not that much. Um, but yeah, for us, we haven't used it. We will, when we get to a lot more states and we have a lot more money in the bank, and it's and we're less worried about having a stance. We'll start doing some of that. But I just thought it's kind of noteworthy that you can get pretty far not even paying attention to who your counterparties are.
That is really noteworthy. I think that's the first time I've heard that in a betting pod. So I hope people like take notice of that because I learned something. And from what I'm hearing, it seems like the code that you have in the back pocket is like the we're gonna have opinions code. And right now you're on the like the delta neutral program, which might be like um less existentially worrying as a firm. You're like, okay, it'll be fine. It's like, well, this will be okay. We'll
Yeah,
balance it out. We might move a little. We might ignore you and we'll move off some other stuff. I think the
there's a
moving off
yeah,
of. Oh, sorry. Go
but yeah.
ahead.
That just it's kind of interesting how the more liquid you get, it actually all becomes simpler. The if you're a if you're a sports book, some of the most important members of your trading team are your marketing team and your UI UX team and everything, because
Mm-hmm.
you're never gonna stop yourself from taking that first good bet, or you can have better openers or whatever, or move off news faster. Um, but there's always a vulnerability there, and it is expensive to get optimal there. And where you can really make up for it is just how much order flow do you do after that happens, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it's just so much easier to double the amount of volume you do after getting efficient than it is to half the number of times that you get picked off. Like the first thing is way easier to solve for. Um, yeah, I don't know why I thought of that, but
No, because this is the question. Like everyone, do you are is there a simpatico relationship between sharps and sports books? And you're saying with enough
uh,
volume, maybe.
yeah. Well, oh, and the other thing with volume, right, is we definitely like do listen to the market, right? If the whole market steams down and we haven't taken a bet, we will still come down. And the more
Hmm.
liquid you get, the more you don't care. And you just
Hmm.
like it just all moves on flow and it's just all fading. And again, that's something where like we could just turn something off, like just stop taking a market average and pumping it in.
Hmm.
Well, our models actually take market averages on sides and totals as inputs. One of the things that's nice about that is if you're a trader and you're watching a game and Patrick Mahomes gets hurt or something, you can very quickly update like your pregame priors on what the spread in this game would be without Mahomes, and
Hmm.
all of a sudden it regenerates like, oh, this
Hmm.
is what we now think about the live total and live spread. And we have ways of just sort of auto calibrating that to what other books have too, but we like to be able to do it ourselves and do it quickly. Um, a simpatico relationship between sharps and books. Every book works differently. Uh, you've definitely seen a couple of books that maybe a few years ago were thought of as recreational that have gotten sharper faster. You know, I think of like FanDuel and
Mm-hmm.
Caesars,
Mm-hmm.
who in different ways kept taking some money. And I think especially people who like try and do maybe live arbitrage or anything like that would say they're a they're a step ahead of MGM, DraftKings, whatever. So they're clearly trying, you know, to
Yes,
take the action, learn something. Uh, Nobody at those shops is going around and talking about what they're doing like I am, so we don't have a lot of visibility into it.
I
But
know.
there's been a trajectory there for sure. Um, and then of course, yeah, like if you know, there's I think some people who have only ever been on the buy side might kind of overstate how valuable sharp action is to books,
No.
or books that maybe make their bones like taking sharp action. Like I'm probably supposed to come here and say the
Yeah.
sharps make things better. You know,
Yeah.
it,
More sharps.
if because if there's literally no sharp action, then it doesn't matter what number you take, right? There are a few times this year, like there's a game where the Jets played the Chiefs on Sunday or Monday night, and the Jets had lost Aaron Rodgers a few weeks beforehand, and everywhere closed plus 7.5. Um, but the public opinion was just the Jets are done for. The season is so ruined, you know. And DraftKings closed at plus 9.5 because it's like there's just nobody can come in and get the plus 9.5. And if they do, it's almost like a honeypot, right? Like, oh, get rid of that guy. You
Yeah,
just
yeah,
did
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Um, Now, where it gets messy, right, is like with beards and everything, and certainly the kind of people who really talk publicly about their operations and who are really serious professional bettors are getting back into these books over and over and over again. Um, but there's a lot of people who burn through their account and then they say, okay, I'm not going to keep doing that, right? And so net, uh, they are reducing the amount of sharp flow they get by doing this. So long story short, you certainly use the information you get from sharps. It's nice to know who they are and to actually have this transparent relationship. There is I wish the court of public opinion value of it was more valuable, would be my kind of one stance, right? I continue to be shocked that the the scandal conversations around sports betting in this country very publicly don't focus on the limiting thing. I would
Yeah.
have guessed with the level of aggression that there would be more kind of public uproar of like, oh, this is really a scam, whereby a company like us or Circa or whoever would be able to garner more public goodwill off the fact that they didn't do that. It hasn't happened yet. It could happen at any moment. Culture's hard to predict, and the floodgates could
Mhm.
open. But that's not the way it's gone.
I have this like theory that like the one thing that all the sharps on Twitter want that are very like vocal about being limited is just like validation and to hear in the public that like this is wrong and for people to see that they're being mistreated. And I think the fact like that you said there hasn't been this backlash on limiting, I think that it doesn't matter, like there's limiting, and like you said, if you're really serious about this, you're going to get back into the books. And I actually think for us, it's good that the books limit because most people are going to give up and we'll just like get betting partners and just keep playing. And that makes us more money. But like this like whole other like emotional factor of it is people just want to hear them say, we limit winning bettors.
Yeah,
Like it doesn't
that's true.
happen.
You know, I love the guy who really got me in all this. I won't say his name because I already outed him as a bookmaker. Um, but I was betting into his PPH, and then we started working together. And early on, he kind of gave me this talk about these sports books are so greedy and like we're gonna hit them where it hurts. Like we're gonna get back at them on behalf of the little guy. The little guy.
Yeah.
And then after a little bit, he's like, well, you know how I gave you that PPH account? If you could get more of those PPH accounts, that's where we'd really make some money. I'm like, well, isn't that the little guy? You're saying we're going to make all our money killing the little guy?
Isn't
I'm
that
like,
you? You know,
yeah,
but
like,
like
yeah,
in a different town, that's you in a different town, right? Like,
yeah, exactly.
yeah. I yeah, I think the discourse around it is I don't know. It's emotional. It's not like practical, but I get it. Like I don't care anymore about being limited. You know, you have to stop caring at a certain point, or else you drive yourself crazy. But certainly, like there is a like a fairness. You know, I think inherently, like we get triggered by things seeming unfair, and that seems to be what's going on. But it again, like this is happening. You know the rules of the game. You know, you adapt or die, right? It's not Billy. That's Brad Pitt as Billy Bean in Moneyball or whatever. I always like
Adapt or
that.
die.
Yeah, adapt or
And look,
die. Yeah.
if you're doing doing this, it aggressively overselects for people who are, you know, trying to make fast money slow. You know, like trying to figure out some way to just get out of it and do it yourself, and who place some preference on I'd rather work harder but not be working for somebody else. And it's a particular skill set, and it translates into other things. And they're like it did for me, where it's like, okay, I'm going to go work at this company, but I get to run things, and like, you know, I am building software tools on the side for other sharp bettors and groups, and I am kind of positioning myself to like, I know how this works well enough that for the rest of my life, I could do things my way if I want to, and that's a beautiful thing. And at some point, the same way like you had to figure all this out and you had to stay one step ahead, at some point you're going to have to stay one step ahead again,
Yeah.
and that's why you're doing it. So go do it and figure out what it is, because there's something out there. There's another way you're gonna get rich and avoid you know, working for the man or whatever it is that you're trying to run from. Um,
I
anyways, I did want to do a
yeah.
little video demo with you of some of the
Let's
stuff
do
we
it.
have, just in case anyone finds it interesting.
Let's
Um,
do it. Yeah, we're gonna switch over to a Google Meet. It doesn't we don't need to give you all the behind the scenes. I'll probably cut this part of the pod, but yeah, join us for the video demo.
all right,
All
so
right.
this is yeah. Go ahead.
Oh, so I was gonna intro you. This is the never before seen. This is the coolest thing that's happened on the podcast. Henry's gonna walk us through some trading tools for Novik.
Yeah. So I have like a staging environment set up and a kind of stripped down version of our software, so I could put a visual to some of the stuff we were talking about. Um, yeah. So what we have, you know, a list of today's games, and then all this design is kind of inspired by like options trading, where you would have different strikes on different rows, and then all the data about what you think about those strikes. We call different lines strikes, like plus 1.5, plus 2.5, plus 3.5. We call those strikes here. Um, just a note on like trading software, and one of my beefs with some of the other trading platforms I've used is everything should be really fast. Like if I and it should be customizable, right? So like here's my side panel. There's usually something here that I cropped out. Sorry, this big X. Like if I don't want to see this, this should be able to go away. I should be able to get rid of these columns. It should be instant. Like people are trying to make money here. Anyways,
Mm-hmm.
um, and yeah, so we try to make this screen as like information dense as we possibly can. Um, on the back end, everything happens totally automated, but every value you see on here that's in blue can be overridden by a trader, which, as you can see, is like most of them, right? So if I think the actual fair estimate on Yankees is minus 160, I can just do that and the whole thing updates, like our pricing, the
Mm.
bid asks, everything. Um, the and you can also see this is now in red because under the hood we're checking and we're like, hey, this estimate doesn't make sense to us because our model says blah blah blah. So visual cues on all of these things. Um, so yeah, just to kind of go from left to right and explain the way we think about this. We separate into estimating, pricing, and scaling. So the first thing we think about is what is the actual fair value on a market? Like just irrespective of everything else, how often do we actually think the Yankees win, percentage wise or American odds wise? From there, based on uh, how adverse this market is, what bets we've taken so far, what price would we actually be willing to buy this thing for? So that's this column here. Then based on all that information, okay, we're buying at this. Our fair estimate is this. This is how challenging we think this market is. How much quantity do we want to have on the book? Quantity for us, it's in both. It's risk plus to win. So this would be like you can bet 550 to win 350, kind of roughly, or 500 with 400. Then we just have the actual orders that are on the book. So when we have exchange functionality, like if there are orders that are ahead of us, like this is just whatever the top book order is. This is all color coded, so you can see if it's ours or somebody else's. And then realized position and expected. How much money have we sunk into this thing? Like where are we? If we're balanced, if we've taken action on both sides, realize can be positive. It's almost always negative because we're a little asymmetrical. Position, how much we stand to gain on this thing. And then expected is like equity, right? From poker, right? Like, okay, this
Mm-hmm.
is how much we'll make on either outcome. And then based on our current forecasts, what do we expect is going to happen on average to us?
And
Basically just like EV.
do you run EV calcs like how close you're running to expected or not?
Yeah, we do reports. We do them grouped by different like regimes, like live versus pregame and things
That
like
makes
that.
sense.
Um, but like I said, we haven't even done a single full season start to finish. Like we started mid NBA, tail end of NFL. So and we're adding so many users. We really don't have a. I try not to look at the numbers too much, right? Like
Right.
just trade correctly. Let's wait till we have some real data. I'm on my phone going to bet on this Blue Jays game,
There
over 8.5.
we
Uh,
go.
uh,
If this was
that's
live, this would be a bet. This is a pick show. Dude, this
yeah,
is
yeah.
so
There's a
cool. This is so cool.
yeah. Okay,
I
so you
love it.
just
And there
saw.
you go. Yeah.
You see how, and like I said, everything changes, right? Because there
Right.
is like some modicum of correlation, right?
Hmm.
I have this all in our kind of like low liquidity opening state where it's like $500 limits, and we move to like ask on fair on a single max bet. So this is like how overnights open. You know what I mean? Um,
So cool.
and then yeah, and if you look at our performance tab, right, you can now see this very clear. Like, okay, this is where we're making money. This is where we're losing money. If I threw in, you know, Blue Jays plus 1.5, and
Oh,
then
cool.
Yankees money line. So you start assembling this thing, right? And and you can see how, if we were late in this game, this window gets smaller and smaller. There's like less possible things that can happen. And so you start getting these more pronounced things of like, oh, 5-4 is really devastating because of the plus 1.5 of the money line.
Hmm.
And then how do you adjust prices on that? I'm also just gonna just to illustrate all this stuff that we've worked on for so long.
So cool,
Like
man.
if somebody comes back and takes that underprice right now like we start getting a lot more neutral, right? Like all this like
Hmm.
red and green starts coming back to white, and so it's all designed so that a trader at a very quick glance can tell what's going on. Um, these are all the bets. We also have them
Yep.
per event,
Yep.
and so like you can see. Let me actually go to the bet feed over here. So if somebody bet that Yankees minus 1.5, and then we update our estimate, like either we see the market move or it's mid game and the Yankees score a run, and we're like, oh, actually, like this is now, this is an override. Usually the whole system would
Hmm.
update. Like we now think oh, sorry, I did this on the wrong side. Let me make this longer because we actually want Yankees. Um, like all of a sudden, this is a bad bet, and we can kind of very quickly see at a glance.
Hmm.
Like, so this helps you see very quickly, oh, this guy's clicking, and a few seconds later, the market's moving against us. This guy's probably, you know, live arbing, or we might have a stale line. Let's look at what we're
Hmm.
doing. Um, and then, oh yeah, you see the like decreasing quantities too as we're making all these
Yeah.
bets, and I
Yeah.
can just
That's
restore
right.
that.
I
Yeah.
wasn't even looking at that, but that's right.
And yeah, with these like, so if this sensitivity was really way too high, you'd see like we start getting these super aggressive moves, right? Where it's like, you know, Yankees were willing to really overpay on.
Hmm.
And then as we get closer to game time, so all this kind of like changes dynamically over time. Like we'll get less sensitive to all this stuff.
So in that
Um,
example, you were basically willing to take a minus EV bet on the Yankees, or like to
yeah, yeah,
you.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
yes, yeah.
You deemed
And
it
so we would
minus EV.
only, yeah, we would only really have, we would never have sensitivity that low, but like that would be, you know, if we had some market, we would only take $100 on it, the system would like update sensitivity be really high.
Right.
Um,
Right. Right.
yeah. And oh, let me
Ah,
turn
so
this pricing
cool.
chart back on.
Oh yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah. That's right.
yeah. So like here you can see, right? So like here's a Yankee spread. I'm gonna go to, oh, all these values, by the way, that you can change, you can either set them for like this very specific market, like I just want to change the +2.5 line, or for all spreads or all totals, or for this entire game, or for all MOB, or globally, right? Like I could go in and like just globally, you know, reduce profit a little bit, and it's just going to update everything. So again, it's like we try to make everything. You can do anything you want in like 2 clicks on this software is the goal, really. Like we always want it to
Wow.
be very fast. And I'll be honest, I was very against this, like, you can control anything at any level approach. And our CTO, Kalechi, was like, no, like fully generalized, fully controllable, everything is exposed. And he was right. Like, within weeks of launching, our traders had clicked every button on this UI. Like, there's always
Yeah.
some reason, and there's some level of specificity. So, you know, like if you had, you know, some doubts about, let me see, do I have NBA? I spun this up quickly. Okay, great. So I have this Blazers game. I think I have NHL. And by the way, you can pick all these things that you want to trade right now and go to this custom tab. And we just have like this
Mm,
full run of, you know, this is all the markets you're trading, which is very helpful when you're trading live. Um, but yeah, like if you had this Blazers game and, uh, or I'm not even, who is even good on this team? Uh, let's, let's pick, you know, let's say you don't know if SGA is going to play, right? He's questionable. You might have some notion of like, okay, the spread in this game is a much more adverse market right now. Like, I'm much more
mm,
concerned about this, and this is the additional theoretical hold that I want to charge. And you see down here, like this level of market adversity is increasing, and that's bringing the amount of profit we can charge further and further down. We have a ceiling where eventually we get to a level of hold that's so high that it's like we're just not trading this, right? Like
mhm,
we, I think in the future this will be more of a curve, so we have the room for it. But we kind of don't want to hang like -125 on both sides. So
mhm,
we hit some limit where it's like if it gets this hard, like if it plays under review, we go to like a max adversity thing. Then we go off the board for a little bit.
mhm.
Um, and you might say, you know, but for totals, like he still affects the total, but it's not as much, and so that's somewhere around here. And you asked about alts, right? Like here's our main
Mhm.
total. When we go to the alt total, like we're adding in this
A
extra
bunch.
like
Yeah.
3% for all. More earthquakes in New York. I've never seen so many earthquakes on do not disturb mode. Um, yeah, and you know this is, I have this set to 100 hours, but if we had made
Yeah.
this, you know, 12, like we're just opening this game 12 hours before it starts, like all of a sudden these numbers are going. In fact, we aren't even trading alts on this anymore. I'm going to turn
Mm,
off opposite market because it's just too much when you factor in uh, that we just opened and we're opening very sensitively. Um, the radius, you know, just how many alts are we trading? We can add to
mhm.
these things.
Oh,
Um,
interesting.
yeah, and so that's the general idea. That's how we manage all this stuff. This does run on mobile, so you know it's not that many things that you would do. It's generally just take a big bet, open it up, see see like is the market where we are, were we just off market? Did we adjust properly? Did we over adjust? Like sometimes, I might want to move a little more if I'm like, oh, I think we can actually get some action on the other side, and I really like to, or sometimes a little less. Like generally, I would say if I think we got clicked just because we were off market, I I'm not going to change anything, right? It's like, well, this guy just banged us into place. If something about the click tells me like, oh, we might be about to see a lot of steam here, I might want to move a little more because I think there's a small window to get balanced, and I think there's actually value in hanging an off market line, and all that is just kind of trader stuff, and
Mhm.
will depend on the users you have and who's trading and everything. And it's fine if we don't do any of it, but that's what we do.
Wow. Thank you. This is so cool. I've literally never seen the back end of a sports book. I
I have no idea
imagine,
what anybody else's looks like.
yeah, fair. Well, this is cool, man. It's like, wow. I love it. It's so fast and the display is super clean. Damn, dude. 10 months. Shout out. Shout out to
I
No
mean,
Big and
yeah,
Henry. Like, wow. Well, I
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
I was, no, I was gonna say, like, well, I mean, this is like the coolest, I think the coolest thing that's happened in the podcast short run, honestly. Like people are gonna geek out on this because most people who watch this are pretty like into sports betting. It doesn't attract a ton of casuals. So this is gonna
Yeah.
be like as Haggard would say, catnip, hopefully.
Yeah, like you were saying in the podcast, right? Like where do player props go in this? Where do first half spreads and totals? Like obviously under the hood in our simulations, we know what the score was at halftime. Do you have a separate grid of the score at the end of halftime? Do you have a separate grid for all the receive? Like, does it really scale this display, or do you start saying
Hmm.
I can't put all of this and have it still be a
Right.
usable product for a trader? Where do you cut corners? So those are the kind of challenges and things we're thinking about right now. Like all of this, you can just say we let it work on its own. There's no interference, and you widen out, you reduce limits, you crank up sensitivity, and it's a product rather than a big source of income. But you also want to make money, so that's the kind of stuff we have to figure out, and that's what we're thinking about right now.